we cannot trust the administration with respect to anything that it produces. And so there are a couple issues here. There's the issue of whether whatever transcript they provide is the only transcript of this conversation, or whether there are other readouts of that conversation, and whether they've cherry-picked and picked the best readout of that conversation.
Joining our discussion now is Larry Pfeiffer. He was the chief of staff to the director of the CIA during the Bush administration from 2006 to 2009. And then he went on to become the director of the White House Situation Room for President Obama. He listened in on President Obama's phone calls with heads of state and prepared the written records of those phone calls. Larry Pfeiffer, thank you very much for joining us tonight. You just heard what Adam Schiff said. How would you advise Adam Schiff in evaluating what is released tomorrow? What can we expect to be released tomorrow?
Thank you, Lawrence. Situation Room helps set up, monitor, and writes up the transcript of the phone calls. At least historically, that's what they've done. I'm not from the Trump White House. I can't say whether they've changed the procedures since I was there. The transcripts are finalized by a member of the NSC Directorate staff responsible for the call. In this case, it would be the European Directorate. That becomes the final transcript. If that is what is released, I'd like to think that it will be as accurate a transcript as they could have. If it appears to be anything less than accurate, there are those original rough transcripts that were done by the Situation Room staff.
So there are no recordings of the phone calls?
Not unless, again, procedures have changed in the last few years. But when I arrived, that was one of my first questions when I heard this elaborate monitoring procedure and transcription procedure we had. My first question was, why aren't we just recording these calls? And I was told that that was something that we had stopped doing in the mid-1970s. So I didn't push the issue after that.
Yes, after the Nixon tapes brought down
Correct.
the president. So these are handwritten notes that people are, how many people are taking the notes as the
Sure.
speakers are talking?
So normally on a good day, I would assign 3 people to listen on the phone call. They sit there at their keyboard with headphones on, and they are just hammering away at those keys. Those 3 individuals at the end of the call get together. They compare the transcripts because one person may have heard something the other person didn't, or understood something the other person didn't. They would then create a final working transcript. That would be provided then, as I mentioned before, to the directorate, somebody who probably has a little deeper expertise on the topics being discussed to make final corrections. The final memo that would be issued, it could vary from call to call. It could vary from administration to administration, but it could be everything from a verbatim transcript, much like what we had produced from the Situation Room, all the way to, as you mentioned before, a summary, sometimes even a short summary, 2 or 3 sentence summary of the phone call. It just varied.
Do other countries record the phone call, and do we know if the other country is recording the phone call?
We don't specifically know. We don't ask. I do know of one instance when a foreign head of state recorded a phone call, much to our surprise. But we generally expect that it's possible. So it could be done. But it's hard for me to say with certainty.
When you see what's released tomorrow, will you be able to make a judgment about the likely accuracy of what you're looking at?
You know, if one reads it and it sounds like people talking with the starts and stops and the changes in direction in a conversation, just those natural pauses like I'm doing right now as I talk to you, I think one could surmise it's pretty darn accurate. I think if it reads more like elegant prose, it's probably something that's been massaged a bit. And I think if it's just, you know, short summations, if I'm receiving this transcript, I'd probably want to see more than just a summary.
Larry Pfeiffer, can't wait to get your reaction to what is released tomorrow. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.